as I was going through your content, I saw, and this might just be my perception, but I'm hypersensitive to language, hypersensitive to word choice because I think especially when people write like captions or write down
Mhm,
descriptions, they're way more intentional with words they have to write versus what they say.
mhm.
Words just tend to
Okay.
flow, and you might say something wrong and get canceled later or something. But and when people take time to write, especially in terms of a book, and we'll actually get to your book in a second, they're highly intentional. I didn't see much mention of God until you just mentioned it now. However, I
Mhm,
did see a lot of mention of spirituality or vibrations, what have you. And of course, one phrase or term you mentioned in one of your podcasts, you mentioned response ability. And that directly
mm,
ties into what you just kind of mentioned as far as, you're not a healer because the person is just being brought new information and it's based on whether or not they take it. I'm in a phase of my life,
yeah.
especially out the Air Force, where as I'm embarking on my podcast, my YouTube, and actually taking it a lot more seriously, mainly because I have to. Like, I'm not actually
Mm,
working 9 to 5 anymore. Like, this is my full time. The responsibility is a lot more heightened, and I'm like, "Bruh, if this goes under, it's my fault. If I succeed, it's my fault." So a lot of those
mhm.
things I play, especially in my own personal life. But um, what role does God, if at all, play into your practice in terms of coaching? Do you bring any levels of recognizing higher power, any higher levels of objective morality versus, especially
Mhm.
as it relates to your decision making on a day to day basis, especially as a coach?
Mm. Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question because I haven't had the opportunity to answer that question in a public way. So I think probably, well, not probably, I know that what you saw
Hmm.
on my timeline, right, depending on how far back you go and up through recent, what you're
Hmm.
witnessing is literally the evolution of me, right, and my own level of
Hmm.
consciousness raising, and so. Where I have been feeling, I was raised a Christian, I consider
Okay.
myself a follower of Jesus Christ, a follower of the way, um, but that didn't always show up in my work. And
Hmm.
I felt for a long time, I felt like I'm not really sure how much I can show up present in my belief system without turning off, potential
Right.
clients, or
Facts.
potential audience, and that was really present inside of me. And I listened to that voice for a long time, and so more recently, I've come out of that belief system and I've realized that I actually do need to show up much more steadfast and present in my convictions as a Christ
Hmm.
follower. And that as a result of that obedience, um, whoever would attach or detach themselves from me or my content is how it's supposed to be, and I'm okay with that.
Hmm.
Because the calling on my life is a spiritual one, and so part of when I really think about, and this is one of the revelations I had about a year ago that was really turnkey for me. um, I realized that in my life purpose and in my mission, my role is not to serve other people, right? So even though I'm
Wow.
showing up in a public sphere, I'm showing up as a coach, I'm showing up in service to people, that's
Hmm.
actually not my mission. My mission is to be in service to my creator, right? That
Wow.
is the mission. That's the calling on my life and spirit, right? That's the purpose. That's what I was born to do, right? Like it goes
Hmm.
this way. Now, what is going out this way is an outcome of this, right? It's
Right.
an outcome of this relationship and of living in this mission. So when people, put rude comments on my stuff, it doesn't hurt me as much anymore as it used to because I know I'm not for everyone. Not
Facts.
everyone is for me. Some people will reject me. I reject people. So it's okay when people reject me because I reject people too. I have to. And I've become much, much more selective now about not only who I coach, but also about who I allow to coach me and pour into me,
True.
And so now that I have kind of made that shift, now I'm less attached to the outcome of like, well, I just need to attract clients. Like, no, I need to attract a very specific type of client, which is a client that understands that I'm a Christ believer and doesn't require me to hide that fact in order to work with
Hmm.
them. I need a client who understands that my grounding and my value system and my belief system is part of what I'm going to bring forward when I work with them. And they have to be okay with that. Right. And for the most part, the people that I work with, a lot of them are Christ followers or believers too, to some extent. Maybe
Mhm.
they've been shaky on where they're at in their convictions lately. And so having a coach that can actually support and encourage them to reestablish this connection
Mhm.
with the Christ is something that's actually really helpful for them. But not all of my clients are Christians. I actually have a client now, he's Hindu, but our
Mhm.
conversations about spirituality and the necessity of him to show up as the spiritual leader of his home and his household, that's still the same exact conversation.
Facts. Facts.
Still the same conversation, right? Like if that belief system is very important to him, the only way it's going to be imparted on his spouse and children is if he leads the way,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so I'm kind of like at this phase, Raymond, where I'm like, you know what? I'm done hiding this. Like this is me.
Facts.
you know?
Facts.
And I ever since I made that decision, I feel really like even stronger in my conviction that like this is what I need to do moving forward because this is how I'm showing up obedient to the calling on my life by my creator.
Big facts. Big facts. And I mean, very well put as well. Being someone who's also raised Christian, I was raised in the church. My dad was a pastor. Never saw
Mm,
my parents sin. Like, never saw them do
mm,
like drink alcohol, anything of that nature. And so I have a foundation that I haven't really veered far from. I veered some distance from it. But there's a part of me, especially I consider myself an arrogantly intellectual Christian, mainly because I've
mm.
researched it to where like at this point at 30 years old, I believe in God more now than I ever have because I've
Yeah.
asked the proper questions. And so
Mm,
being a podcaster and
beautiful.
like realizing that the majority of the population is not Christian, but yet I still can't ignore the fact that this is a major part of my life, more or less, because if anything, I'm still convicted by things I know to be wrong, even though I still may do it anyway. The conviction hasn't left me. And so there's a part of
Right.
me that I'm like, I want to do this and I want to partake in this, and I still might do it, but that conviction has always, stayed with me. So, um, one thing I like doing, especially in podcasts and YouTube, is like asking questions that require people to posit something other than materialism or other
Mhm.
than naturalism. To where if you ask a question of how did everything begin, you're already on theology. You can't avoid
Right.
the first mind, the first cause. And so, if anything, it makes people pause at. I'm not going to tell you, hey, believe in God. I'm going to ask you a question that requires you to pause at something that doesn't exist on planet Earth, and at
I
least
mean, it's
opens the door.
even Yeah, it's even more common than that though. Like it's an even more basic question. Like I
Hmm.
really find it very, very difficult to even have a conversation about life purpose
Wow,
without having that conversation within a spiritual context. Like how do
facts.
you do that?
Yeah.
How? I just don't see the way that I could have a meaningful conversation with a client or a potential client about life purpose and whether or not they're living in that life purpose and
Hmm.
how they plan on doing that if there is no context that is spiritual. In addition to that, right? Like if we're really going to get into some edification and justification behind
Hmm.
why this matters, there's research. There's research that shows
Yeah.
that the best performers in the world have a spiritual foundation and context for their performance and for
Facts.
why they do what they do the way they do it.
Facts.
There's a spiritual context behind that. So, as a performance coach, it's very difficult for me, once again, to do my work well with a client if they're like, well, I don't have room in my
Hmm.
capacity for any kind of spiritual context. Sorry. That's a coach I would actually say, or that's a client I would tell, I can't work with you then.
Wow.
If you're not at least open to considering how spirituality would impact your life experience in a more positive way and get you better and greater outcomes that lead to more fulfillment in the end, then I don't know how I can help that person. Just it's like cutting off a limb,
Facts.
right, of your
Facts.
body.
Big
I don't know how
facts.
you do it.
Yeah, the question of meaning. it's impossible to arrive at meaning. Like, there's 4 basic questions that whenever I encounter atheists, I always perk up because I love a good debate.
Mhm.
And when you have the right answers, debate becomes fun. It's not so much a requirement or, a chore. But, like, there's 4 basic questions that basically kind of ground people in the reality of a God or higher intelligence. It's, where do I come from? What gives my life meaning? How do I tell right from wrong? And where do I go when I die? There's so
Right.
many different branches that branch off of that, but when I think you hit it right on the nail as far as this conversation that we have on earth about anything. If you ask enough questions of why or how or where it came from, or why is it relevant, you're going to get back to God at some point. The theology, philosophy, cosmology, you try to avoid it, and you're like, no, no, the temperature in this room is too cold or too hot. Yes, enough questions. Just ask why 3 times. You're going to arrive back at something regarding
Creation.
why does it matter exactly. And
Yeah.
especially as it relates to school, I mean, creation and versus evolution, that's a whole conversation and debate that I love having. My comments be a
Mhm.
mess. Like, you go down there and people just, well, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm like, you haven't attached my argument whatsoever. But